I'm Gold Derby News and Features editor Ray Richmond, and I'm welcoming Phil Fowler from the new Peacock series, Mrs. Davis, to our TV editors Meet the Experts panel. Mrs. Davis tells the story of a nun, played brilliantly by Betty Gilpin, who is reluctantly commissioned to save the world from an omniscient artificial intelligence force that now controls humanity, which is not unlike real life these days. Phil, what was it about a show that's so eccentric and offbeat that made you want to join on? Did the pilot script win you over and speak to you?
Well, I first want to just congratulate you on summarizing Mrs. Davis. It's one of the hardest shows, I think, to summarize. And anyone who's watched the show knows how many twists and turns it takes and how convoluted the lore is within it. And so bravo to you for summarizing it up. And hopefully I don't have to now.
My pleasure.
I mean, I've been a big fan of Damon Lindelof for a long time. I've watched everything he's ever done. And so then when I got this script written by him and Tara Hernandez, I mean, I wish everyone could read the script because it's one of the funniest things I've ever read. And so much of the humor was written in the subtext of it, in the descriptions, and it's hilarious. And I even, when I first read it, thought maybe we should have a voiceover. Maybe we should have someone who says all of this description within the show because it's so funny. So it was just very unique. I mean, it starts off with a bloody battle in the mid-centuries, and then it jumps to a deserted island with a castaway who's trying to escape the island. And then we finally, 15 minutes into the show, meet the hero of it, Betty Gilpin playing Simone. And by the end of the pilot, she's sent on a quest for the Holy Grail. I mean, it was just like catnip for an editor because it got to cover so many different genres. And I mean, in the middle of it, there's a big chase scene where some German men are trying to chase down Simone and capture her with a giant net. She at one point jumps through a giant donut on a motorcycle. So it was just like nothing I've ever read. And I was so excited to be able to be a part of it.
And the nothing you've ever read also translates onto the screen. It's like nothing I've ever seen before too. I mean, we saw a mock decapitation right at the outset, and that told me, this is certainly going to be different. I guess the fact it was so wacky and visually arresting obviously appealed to you.
Yeah, it definitely appealed to me. And also, I was just, as a spectator, curious how they were going to pull this off, how a car with a giant magnifying glass would explode a truck full of jam. I was just curious from a production standpoint how they would pull that off. And also the challenges of an editor. How do I help that story and sell that with the cuts?
What conversations did you have with Tara and Damon regarding the pacing and what they were looking for from your edits?
A lot of the early conversations were about the tone of the show, and it's straddling a lot of different tones and a lot of different genres. It's on one hand a live action Looney Tunes. On the other hand, it's a Indiana Jones. On the other hand, it's a sci-fi show about AI, and it also is dealing with religion. So we had a lot of conversations about keeping it light, keeping the humor, but also rounding it with heart and making sure that the performance still felt grounded. And a lot of that also was in conversations about music. We spent a lot of time, the three of us on the pilot, trying different songs in different spots. There's an early montage with the nuns as we see Simone's life at the convent. And we tried all kinds of different music. We tried choral, we tried strings, orchestral music. And Damon ended up pitching this Dolly Parton song that I feel like kind of cemented the whole thing together and kind of gave us what our tone was for the show going forward, which was a little bit of a retro feel, but so we mixed genres a lot. And so over the course of the season, we got to just play a lot with the music, and that's a lot of fun. That's my favorite part, is cutting picture to music. And there's nothing more satisfying than when you lay in that perfect piece of music and the edits are all just hitting right in the best spot.
I'm imagining the show could be either a creative dream or a frightening nightmare for an editor, depending on your mindset. But you really did a masterful job here, Phil, of balancing the comedy and the absurdity in Mrs. Davis to create sort of an even tone in the show. And a lot of that has to live in the precision of the cuts you did, I would imagine.
Yeah, there was, I mean, a lot of that also is to the credit of the actors, and specifically Betty Gilpin. She's an editor's dream. I've been a fan of hers for probably 10 plus years, since I saw her on Nurse Jackie. And every take she gives is different. And so that's a blessing. And they're all good. They're all amazing, very, very different takes. What you saw on screen, sometimes that was the wackiest takes that we had for her, but also a lot of times there was even wackier takes. And she really is a brave actor who goes for it. And so that, as an editor, can be a challenge, because sometimes what you personally find the most entertaining and the wackiest and the biggest isn't always going to serve the story. So it's a constant honing in on what the tone needs to be. And a scene in the pilot that really personified that was the final scene where she's talking to Mrs. Davis via the teacher, the kindergarten teacher. And that was a scene where we could have played it completely comedic. We had all of those takes from Betty where she just played it very light. And that was a scene that Damon and I really worked on a lot together, where we ended up in a place where we had to create this arc with her character in that scene, where she starts off disbelieving Mrs. Davis, being skeptical, hating Mrs. Davis. And by the end, she needs to be convinced that this is a worthy quest and the stakes are high for her.
I would imagine it's things like that that made you decide to choose the series pilot as your Emmy submission, which has the colorful name of Mother of Mercy, the Call of the Horse. There's so much outrageous about this show, but that was what you chose for your submission.
Yeah, and all of the episode titles were generated by AI. The writers input the scripts, and AI generated these titles, which I can't think of any other title for this episode. It's perfection.
How is editing this show different than working on, say, Grease, Rise of the Pink Ladies, or a movie like The Lie?
They're all very different. Grease is a musical, and so that has its own challenges and fun in cutting big choreographed musical sequences. The Lie, which is one of my favorite projects I've cut, was a thriller and very much about the space and the beats and letting the tension rise. Mrs. Davis is the best of all worlds, in my opinion, because you get to play in all of the different genres, and you get to live in this fantasy world. And as an editor, every episode I edited had a different genre. I cut the pilot, but I also cut episode 3, which was Excalibur, which was a competition of all these men and women with their hands on a sword, and it was the genre was more of a Western in that episode. And then I cut episode 6, which is more of a Mission Impossible spy thriller. So what I loved about Mrs. Davis was I got to just play in all these different genres and live my best life cutting this footage.
you can see how different everything is. It was like doing a bunch of little mini movies where everything had a different tone. It was really fun. Phil, good luck to you at the upcoming Emmys. Mrs. Davis is currently streaming. It's 8 episodes over Peacock. Thanks for joining us at Gold Derby.
Thank you so much.